Hello everyone, welcome to the 2022 AgPro Spring Clinic. My name is Chris Price, I'm a service tech here at London. We're going to today go over in this segment on common wear parts for the planter and the row units. We'll start with the front of the planter with no-till calders and row cleaners if you have them. We'll work our way back to the meter or the row unit with the openers and the closing wheel and gauge wheels, and then eventually we'll get up to the point where we'll look at common wear parts for the meter. And at this time, we'll start looking at the wear points on the row cleaners and no-tills. First off, we're going to start talking about no-till calders and the row cleaners. The biggest thing on those is to make sure there's no uneven wear on either the row cleaner blades or the no-till calder blades. We will want to check the bearings on them and make sure none of those are out. The no-till calders, first off, can be adjusted in the back with taking the cap off and can be greased. You'll want to adjust the nut on the back for the bearings just to make sure there's a slight drag and not too much drag onto the blade. Setting wise, you would want to make sure that the no-till calder is 3/8 inch above the bottom part of the True V opener, and that'll give us good conditions to make a good trench for no-till conditions. Next, we'll start off by going through some of the opener items here. Obviously, we'll make sure the bearings are not out on them. We can easily check that by pulling in on the blades and make sure there's no signs of a bearing failure. Minimum spec for the openers is 14 inches. Other than taking a gauge wheel off and measuring, you could easily see whether or not the bevel is gone on the opener, and also making sure there's no cracks in any of the part of it, or if you pull the gauge wheel off, you can see and make sure that there's nothing wrong with the rivets or the mount for the opener. The easiest way to check to make sure if you have to replace openers, is to use 2 business cards in each side of the pinch point and use a tape measure, and the spec should be between 1.5 and 2.5 inches to make a good trench for the seed. When looking at the gauge wheels, we'll want to make sure that the bearings are not out in them and they spin freely. Another point to look at is the gauge wheel arm wear from the mustache piece from the depth adjustment. Excessive wear, and over time this mustache piece will start riding into the arms. Typically you can either replace these, or you can flip them from side to side and use the bottom side without any troubles, and you can extend the life of that arm. Thing to note would be that as the mustache piece wears into that gauge, you're going to end up having to adjust this down further because you're going to end up planting deeper. So it's kind of an overseen thing. Sometimes you end up, without noticing it, you plant deeper than what you're anticipating, and it's a good thing to keep track of. If you lose a 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch of a wear into here, you will end up eventually planting 1/4 to 1/2 inch deeper. The gauge wheel arm bushings are retrofittable. If you have a large hex nut on the end of here, we can replace those with the newer style bushing that has extended life to it. We would just want to make sure that there's not excessive wear into these bushings, as it's going to wear your gauge wheel out more. So now we're going to go and work towards the closing wheel frame and closing wheels and go over wear parts on that. So the biggest thing with the closing wheels is making sure that the bearings are not out, or there's no cracks or anything in the plastics of the closing wheel. Or in case if you have cast iron wheels, you would just want to make sure the bearings, or there's no obvious problems with the cast wheels. Most of the time it seems it's easier just to buy a whole assembly for a closing wheel with rubber closing wheels. It's a lot more cost effective, it seems like, and it's a lot less time consuming than trying to switch over the plastic or to replace a bearing on the inside. In this case, we have one that has the plastic starting to come apart on it, and eventually will lead to the rubber falling off of the wheel throughout the field. With that, we'll talk about the closing wheel frame. The bushings inside of here can eventually, over time, start to wear out and groove, and it'll cause the closing wheel frame to move side to side, or it could just leave it to one side and not close the trench correctly. So what we want to do is just go through, and we can wiggle any of these and make sure there's not excessive wear to those. And if there is, you can go and through service parts and buy the replacement bushings. And on this one in particular, it actually has the part number written on it. We can go through and check all the springs and make sure there's none that are broken, make sure there's none that show visible signs of rust or issues that could be leading up to it breaking throughout the planting season. With that, we're going to go into some of the meter wear parts. Here we have a ME5 unit, similar to what the Pro Series was. There's not very many differences with them, so if you have a Pro Series, it'll kind of work the same way. One of the most important things is the singulator wear. Sometimes with incorrect disc tension or hub height settings, you'll see they'll start to become wear into this, and sometimes if it's extreme, it'll get into the actual meter housing. A lot of times, if you feel underneath where the stair step is, you'll feel a cupping into there. If it gets too much wear into there, it'll cause inconsistent seed spacing and also poor singulation with the meter. Also, you want to check to make sure your brushes are not clogged up with stuff into the brushes. Typically, brush replacement's not completely necessary. You could just go through here and clean the brushes out, and typically you get another season use out of them if they're really bad. You also want to check the inner seal. Make sure it's still flexible and able to seal to the back side of the seed disc. With that, we'll move over to the vacuum seal on the outside. You want to, same thing as the inner seal, you want to make sure it's still flexible and not hardened. Sometimes you can clean these and get another year use out of them, but if they're in pretty poor shape into these corner places here and you're having issues with vacuum, you're going to want to have to replace those. Wipers, we don't really see a lot of wear with the wipers. Sometimes they'll start getting worn out. More commonly with the knockout wheels for corn, you'll end up seeing the wheel starting to become loose and sometimes falling off, and typically that will only cause if you have fragments of the seed in the bins, you'll end up getting seed stuck into the seed bowls, or the seed disc rather. If you have a poor seal, you'll eventually start to see the wear onto the disc, which typically won't be a problem unless you're having to replace the seal, and then you will sometimes see where the seal is not completely contacting the way the old seal had worn into the disc. So sometimes you can replace the seal and it actually could help a little bit, but it'd be better off replacing them as a pair, especially if you see extreme grooves into the seed disc. On the back side of here, you'll see there is a little bit of a notching here, and that would be from bolt or disc tension. This one in particular is not worn very badly, but sometimes if it's set too tight, you'll end up seeing it starting to notch out and can potentially end up into the hole where the seed should be. Here we have a singulator out. This is actually from a Pro Series unit, and you can see this one's been notched out pretty good and was needing replaced. And with that, we'll end up moving to the ExactEmerge Pro units and go through wear parts on those. And here we have an ExactEmerge meter. Bolt tension is very important on these, and with that you end up having wear onto these 4 pads. This is an earlier style of the ExactEmerge meter. It has an aluminum wear pad, and now up to the current models we have a ceramic pad that goes in place of the aluminum ones that have a wear marker there. And once the wear marker is out and it's not visible anymore, you'll want to replace those to make sure you have good bolt tension and make sure that it don't end up getting into the housing, as this one is starting to go into the housing. On top of that, we'll want to make sure with the higher vacuums we've been running now with the ExactEmerge, the vacuum seals are important to make sure that they're not hardened over and they're still flexible. So that'll be one thing you want to make sure you check every year with these high vacuum ExactEmerge meters. With that, with the meter bowls, you'll see this one has gotten some excessive wear into the meter bowl. This one's not replaced, wouldn't need to be replaced in my opinion, but eventually this will start getting down into these notches and into the holes at some point. Other side of it, we'll see that this one doesn't have very much vacuum seal wear, which would mean that typically the seals are in good shape and are still flexible and able to seal to the bowl correctly as they should. Other parts we want to check on through the meter is to make sure there's nothing wrong with the rumble strip. This one in particular is for corn, or the smooth strip, that would be for beans. We will make sure we were not missing any of the rubber fingers here for the singulator, and to check the condition of the inner vacuum seal. Brush wise on these, we don't really see a lot of wear on them, but it's always a good idea to go through and check and make sure there's nothing wrong with those. Make sure they're not starting to fray or break apart in any way. The other most important part of the ExactEmerge planter is the brush belt design, which will keep the consistent seed spacing. The biggest thing we want to do after we plant for the year, we'll detension these when we go into the summer and winter months while it's sitting in the barn, to keep from stretching this belt out when it's not in use. And then in the spring we'll have to retension them all. The other thing we want to check to make sure is that we don't have any cupping here in the middle of the brush belt where the seed gets pushed in. Eventually over time you'll see that, and then it'll cause inconsistent seed spacing and also poor singulation. The other thing on these brush belts is the brush cleaner rod here. I want to make sure that it is still in all one piece and it doesn't get broken, or sometimes in certain situations with liquid fertilizer use with the planter, you can see it start to get rotted away here. Eventually that will cause dirt and debris to get back up in through the brush belt on the return side and cause issues with the brush belt. The seed sensor, with this I just want to make a note that if you were to replace it, to make sure that the notch goes in to the seed sensor. If not, it'll cause a lot of issues with the brush belt, and you might get codes for brush belt stalled and stuff like that. So we just want to make sure that that notch gets put into the hole or the slot for the seed sensor correctly. In review today, we went over a lot of the common wear items you'd find on a planter row unit. We started from the no-till calders and row cleaners, openers, closing wheels, all the way to the meters. You can find all those wear items available at your local AgPro dealer through Service Parts. And if you have any other further information needed or any questions, feel free to reach out to your local service department or parts department at AgPro. Thanks for watching.